Good evening, my friends. I hope you're warm wherever you are tonight. Before we begin, take a deep breath, dim the lights and settle in. Tonight we travel far back in time, to an age when winter was not just a season but a test of endurance, when warmth was something you built with your own hands, and survival was measured, not in comfort but in ingenuity. Imagine standing in a small medieval village somewhere in northern Europe, perhaps deep in England or across the frozen fields of Scandinavia, where the air is sharp enough to sting your lungs and your breath drifts into the twilight like smoke. The world around you is hushed beneath the weight of snow. Cottages crouch low to the ground, their thatched roofs heavy with frost, their wooden beams darkened by age and weather. There are no glowing windows, no hum of stoves or heaters, only the faint sound of the wind sliding between the houses and the dull rhythmic beat of an axe splitting wood in the distance. You walk slowly through the narrow lane, boots crunching on the frozen earth, until you reach a small door made from rough planks held together with iron nails. It creaks as you push it open, and a wave of warmth greets you, smoky, heavy, and alive. Inside, the light is dim, the air thick with the smell of burning pine, damp wool, and earth. The hearth glows weakly in the center of the room, a small orange heart pulsing against the darkness. Shadows sway gently on the walls, their movements shaped by the flicker of flame. The family within is gathered close, every soul drawn toward the same fragile circle of heat. The father feeds the fire with careful hands, choosing each log as though it were gold. The mother stirs a pot suspended above the coals, and the sound of the spoon against the iron rim is as steady and comforting as a heartbeat. A child sleeps beside the hearth, wrapped in linen, face flushed from the warmth. A dog lies nearby, its fur mottled with ash, its tail thumping softly against the packed earth floor. The walls surrounding them are made of wattle and daub, a humble lattice of woven twigs, smeared with a mixture of mud, straw, and dung. To us it might seem crude, but in this world it is survival art. The clay hardens to stone, the straw binds it like sinew, and the animal matter keeps the mixture from cracking in the frost. Between each timber beam, small patches of moss are tucked to block the wind's whispering teeth. You press your palm against the surface and feel it cool and uneven, yet solid, like the pulse of the land itself. Historians still debate whether these homes were truly warm. Some claim that the difference between inside and outside was barely a few degrees. Others believe that smoke, low ceilings, and human breath created a small bubble of tolerable air near the fire. You crouch close to the hearth, your eyes watering from the smoke, and imagine what it must have been like. Nights spent half-blind in the haze, bodies pressed together under woolen cloaks, patched a dozen times, every movement slow to preserve the warmth already earned. Comfort here is not a luxury, it is an act of defiance. Outside, the wind howls across the frozen fields, rattling the thatched roofs, and you can almost hear the snow pressing against the walls. Yet inside, the sound fades. The fire murmurs, the mother hums softly to the baby, and the room feels like a pocket of resistance carved out from the storm. The floor beneath your feet is nothing more than hardened dirt, swept smooth and scattered with rushes and straw. In the corner, bundles of herbs hang from the rafters, lavender, mint, and sweet flag, their scent masking the smoke and sweat, turning the air faintly sweet. You take a closer look at the ceiling. It is low, blackened by soot, and bent slightly with age, but it feels almost alive, curved like a protective hand over the family below. There are no chimneys here, only a small vent in the roof where the smoke drifts out in slow, uncertain spirals. The beams creak as the wind leans against them, and you realize that the house is not still. It breathes, sighs, and settles like a living creature. Every crack, every draft, every patched corner is part of its heartbeat. When you step back outside, the world is a blur of white and grey. The village seems to huddle together against the storm. Each cottage shares its wall with the next, an architectural embrace born not of friendship but of necessity. Shared walls mean shared warmth, and in the endless winters of the Middle Ages, that could mean the difference between life and death. Some families even built their homes half buried in the ground, letting the earth itself serve as insulation. In the far north, Vikings and early settlers perfected the turf roof longhouse, thick walls of packed soil and moss, roofs that grew like living blankets, and a single fire burning day and night. Inside such a hall, the air would be damp and smoky but strangely steady, the temperature held by the weight of the land itself. You can almost hear the echo of footsteps across the dirt, the soft bark of dogs, the whisper of old songs traded across centuries. In a world without insulation or electricity, warmth was made through closeness, walls pressed together, families pressed together, generations pressed together by the same instinct to endure. There is something profoundly human about it, this way of building against the cold, not through comfort but through community. The peasants of medieval Europe did not live in luxury, but they lived in rhythm with the elements, taking what the earth gave and reshaping it into safety. Each cottage, no matter how small or crude, carried the fingerprint of survival: timber cut by hand, clay mixed by foot, thatch laid by neighbours side by side, the smell of smoke and damp and life seeping into the bones of the structure, until the house itself seemed to remember every winter it had endured. And as the snow thickens and night falls again, the village glows faintly, each chimney breathing a thin column of warmth into the frozen sky. You feel the cold pressing in, but you also feel something else, a quiet awe, a recognition that coziness, in the truest sense, was born not from comfort but from struggle, and that every beam and stone and ember you see here is a record of human persistence written in smoke and firelight. Morning comes softly, the kind of grey dawn that never truly becomes daylight in winter, a pale wash of light, filtering through a thin sheet of horn that serves as the cottage window, turning the air inside a hazy gold. The fire has burned low through the night, but its embers still pulse faintly beneath a crust of ash, waiting to be stirred back to life. The man of the house kneels beside the hearth, blowing gently on the coals until a tongue of flame returns, weak at first, then stronger, licking at the edge of a new log. The smoke rises lazily toward the roof, curling through the beams before escaping through the small vent above, and with it comes the familiar smell of warmth. Wood, earth, and smoke braided into something elemental, almost sacred. As the family stirs awake, their movements follow the same rhythm every day. Feed the fire, sweep the rushes, patch the walls, check for leaks in the roof, and thank the Lord for another day survived. In a world where everything freezes, rivers, ground, even breath, keeping warmth inside a home becomes a kind of religion. The villagers of medieval Europe did not think in terms of architecture or design. They thought in terms of endurance. They built their homes from whatever their hands could find, and every region developed its own dialogue with the landscape. In the forests of the north, wood was the language of survival. Great oaks were felled with iron axes and dragged home by oxen, their trunks split into beams with wedges and hammers, shaped not by precision but by instinct. The timbers were joined with wooden pegs rather than nails, since metal was expensive and every joint was measured by eye. You can almost picture the craftsman working in the cold, his breath freezing on his beard as he fits two heavy beams together, muttering a small prayer that the house will stand another winter. The wood creaks like a living thing, groaning softly as the structure begins to take form. Historians often debate whether these early timber frames were truly durable, but the evidence still stands, quite literally, in the surviving medieval houses of Europe, their beams darkened to near black by centuries of smoke, but still strong, still carrying the memory of the forests they came from. Between these wooden bones lay the woven flesh of hazel or willow branches, the wattle, forming a lattice across which the daub was spread. The mixture was crude but clever: mud for mass, straw for binding, animal dung for adhesion, and sometimes even hair or blood to hold it firm in the frost. It was a concoction born of necessity and perfected by time. When dry, it became as tough as plaster, sealing the home from wind and snow, and though it sometimes cracked in the cold, those cracks could be filled again by hand. A woman might spend her mornings pressing new layers of mud into the gaps, singing softly as she worked, her fingers red and rough, yet her motions practiced and certain. To her this was not just repair but a form of care. The house needed tending as much as the hearth did. The roof above was perhaps the most remarkable achievement of all. From a distance it looked fragile, a simple slope of straw or reeds piled thickly upon itself. Yet in truth it was a masterpiece of patience and technique. The thatch was layered like feathers, each bundle overlapping the one below, shedding water the way a bird sheds rain. When new, it glowed golden in the sunlight, but over time it darkened, softening to a warm brown, heavy with soot and snow. Birds built nests in it, cats sometimes slept in the eaves, and every so often a curious hen would roost on top, adding to the life that the roof quietly sheltered. It was more than just protection from the weather. It was insulation, keeping out the heat in summer and trapping it in winter. Yet thatch was both a friend and a danger. Too close to the hearth, a stray spark could turn an entire home to cinders in minutes. Many villages had their own quiet rituals to prevent such misfortune. Charms hung above doorways, prayers whispered to saints, and in some cases damp straw kept by the fire to smother accidental flames. Archaeological studies show that despite the risks, thatched roofs endured for decades, sometimes 30 or more years. If patched and combed regularly, maintaining them became a community task. Neighbours would climb onto the roofs together, passing reeds up by hand, laughing through clouds of frost, their breath mingling in the cold air. Beneath your feet, the story of survival continues. Most floors were packed earth, cold and hard but familiar underfoot. Wealthier families might lay planks of oak or elm, while peasants simply scattered rushes across the ground to create a kind of natural carpet. These rushes absorbed moisture and soot, but they were replaced only a few times a year, often after the smell became unbearable. Yet even this simple act carried care and ritual. Before laying new rushes, women would scatter herbs like lavender, mint or thyme to scent the air. In those fleeting moments, the smoke and dampness gave way to sweetness, the scent of warmth reclaimed from decay. In certain parts of Europe, where stone was plentiful, builders turned to it instead of timber. The results were homes that looked far sturdier, their thick walls mortared with lime and sand, sometimes mixed with animal blood to make the bond stronger. You can run your fingers along one of these walls even today, and feel the grit of centuries embedded in its surface. Stone kept out the wind, but not the cold. Its gift was endurance, not comfort. The hearth would glow against it, the firelight dancing across the uneven surface, like a ghostly memory of warmth. And still the stone would remain cool, unmoved. Some of the poorest or most practical villagers built half-buried houses, cutting into the side of a hill or digging deep foundations into the earth. The soil itself became insulation, holding a steady temperature even when the air outside froze solid. You step into one of these dwellings and immediately feel the difference. The air still and damp, the light dim, but the warmth unmistakable. The smell of clay and ash fills your lungs. You can almost hear the quiet breathing of those who once lived here, huddled close to their fire, their voices low, their movements slow and careful, conserving energy and faith in equal measure. Every region had its own secrets. In the Scottish Highlands, peat was pressed into bricks and burned to heat homes where wood was scarce. In the frozen plains of Scandinavia, moss was packed between logs to seal the gaps. In the lowlands of England, reeds from the marshes served as both thatch and bedding. The materials changed, but the purpose never did: to build warmth from whatever the land could offer. Scholars sometimes argue that these medieval builders lacked science, but when you look closely you see a deeper wisdom at work. They understood wind patterns without charts, insulation without chemistry, and drainage without engineering. They learned by watching how frost formed on walls, how snow drifted across roofs, and how sunlight fell through a doorway in winter. Over generations, that knowledge became instinct, passed not through books but through hands, from father to son, mother to daughter, builder to apprentice. an unbroken lineage of survival etched in mud and wood and smoke. And as the snow begins to fall again, soft and endless, you stand once more among these cottages and realize that each one is a story of human endurance, of community, of stubborn warmth against impossible cold. The roofs sag, the beams creak, the walls crumble, yet they still stand, held together by something stronger than mortar or clay, the sheer will to live through another winter. The village breathes quietly beneath its white blanket, smoke rising from a dozen chimneys, each plume twisting into the pale sky like a prayer. And you understand that these were not just homes. They were human hearts built from earth, beating softly against the silence of snow. Evening falls early in the medieval world, and with it comes the kind of darkness that feels heavy, pressing close to the earth, swallowing the outlines of trees and rooftops, until only the faint orange glow of hearths marks the presence of life. Inside one of these small cottages, the air grows thick and intimate, every sound muffled by the walls of clay and straw. The fire, fed all day with bits of wood carefully rationed, becomes now the center of the world. It is not only a source of heat, but of rhythm, of hope, of continuity. The family gathers near it as they have done every night for generations, their bodies leaning toward its pulse, their faces half lit and half shadowed, flickering like old memories. The hearth sits low in the middle of the single room, built from flat stones blackened with soot. Above it hangs a crooked iron hook where the cooking pot sways gently, steam curling upward into the rafters. The stew within is simple, perhaps a broth of barley, onions and salted meat, but its scent fills every corner, mingling with the earthy smell of the house. A mother stirs it slowly, humming to herself, her voice steady and unhurried, as if the song itself could keep the night at bay. A father sharpens a tool by the firelight, the rasp of metal against stone steady as breathing, while a child wraps himself in a worn wool blanket and watches the sparks rise like tiny spirits toward the ceiling. There is no chimney here, no separation between air and smoke. The whole family breathes the same dense warmth that coats the beams in a soft black sheen. The smoke stings the eyes and clings to the hair, but to them this is the smell of home. It seeps into the wood, into the wool of their clothes, into the straw of their bedding, until it becomes indistinguishable from their own scent. The fire is both comfort and danger, too weak, and the frost creeps back through the cracks, too strong, and a single spark might set the thatch alight. This delicate balance defines their nights, and so the father tends the embers constantly, shifting the logs, raking the coals, blowing softly to keep the flame alive. Matches do not exist, and flint is precious, so the fire must never die. It is carried from day to day like a sacred inheritance, preserved beneath ashes until morning. The light it gives off is not bright, but soft, golden and alive. It paints the walls in warm tones, glints off a pewter cup, and catches the faint gleam of a rosary hanging near the door. Everything moves slowly here. The spoon in the pot, the flicker of the flame, the rhythm of the family's breathing, as if the whole house is synchronized to the heartbeat of the fire. The dog shifts in his sleep and exhales a low sigh, the sound of absolute trust. Outside, the wind howls against the thatch, testing it for weakness, but the walls hold. The door rattles on its hinges, the timbers groan, and the cottage seems to reply with its own quiet creaks and murmurs. It is not silence, but conversation, the living sound of a structure and its people enduring together. When the meal is ready, it is shared without ceremony. Wooden bowls are passed around, the stew ladled out carefully to make sure everyone receives a share. There is no abundance here, but there is fairness, and that is its own kind of wealth. The child eats slowly, eyes half closed, savouring each bite, while his parents watch with a tired pride that only hard winters can teach. A crust of coarse bread, warmed near the embers, completes the meal. It is dense, sour, and faintly smoky, but to them it tastes like gratitude. Later, as the fire settles into a bed of coals, the family prepares to sleep. The floor is covered in straw and old cloth, layered thick enough to dull the bite of the earth beneath. Over this they spread furs, cloaks and patched blankets, each one carrying the faint warmth of the last night's dreams. They do not sleep apart, but together, bodies pressed close, sharing their heat like animals in a den. The parents lie in the centre, the child curled between them, the dog at their feet. In the flickering half-light, you can see the slow rise and fall of their breaths blending into one rhythm. Before they close their eyes, the father takes a small metal pan filled with coals and slides it under the bedding to warm it. The glow beneath the cloth looks like a buried star. For a moment he pauses, watching the faint orange pulse, and you can almost see in his eyes a kind of silent prayer, not for wealth or ease, but simply for another morning of life. Then he covers the pan carefully, rakes the ashes over the last embers in the hearth, and the room falls into darkness. The smell of smoke lingers in the air, thick and familiar, and the faint crackle of the cooling fire is the last sound before silence. Outside, the storm continues, snow tapping gently against the roof, frost crawling across the window like delicate lace. But within these humble walls, the night feels almost merciful. It is warm enough to sleep, quiet enough to dream, safe enough to forget. For a few hours, how close death always lingers in the cold. As you watch them drift into sleep, you realize that warmth in the medieval world was never only about temperature. It was about nearness to the fire, to each other, to the fragile boundary that kept life from freezing over. The hearth was the center of that balance, the beating heart of every home, a small miracle rekindled every dawn. In its light, families found comfort, hope, and the faint reflection of eternity. And outside, beyond the glow of the last embers, the village breathes as one, a cluster of fires scattered across the white plain, each sending up a slender column of smoke that twists and disappears into the long winter sky. Dawn arrives pale and slow, seeping through the thin horn window like watered milk, and for a moment the line between night and day seems uncertain. The family wakes not to an alarm, but to the sound of the fire being coaxed back to life, the faint crackle of a new log catching, the quiet rustle of straw as they rise from their bedding. The air inside the cottage is cold enough to sting, but not unbearable. It carries that strange balance of chill and comfort that marks every medieval morning. The father moves with practiced rhythm, his hands blackened from soot, stirring the ashes until the coals glow again, while the mother shakes out the furs, dusting away the frost that has crept in during the night. The child blinks sleepily, breath visible in the dim light, and crawls closer to the fire as if drawn by instinct. Keeping the heat inside is a science of patience and observation, learned through centuries of trial and error, passed down in gestures rather than words. There is no insulation as we know it, no wool padding in walls or glass panes in windows, only an ancient intimacy with the materials of the earth. The villagers have learned that everything around them can be used to block the cold. They pack the gaps in the timber beams with moss, the kind that grows soft and thick in the shadow of the forest, damp and pliant enough to mould between the cracks. When it dries, it hardens into a natural seal, keeping the wind's hiss outside where it belongs. Some even mix the moss with animal fat, creating a waxy layer that repels moisture and holds fast through the storm. The walls themselves are alive with layers of care. Fresh daub is applied every few years, a process that turns into a communal event, with neighbours lending hands, laughter echoing faintly between the houses as the villagers slap the mud into place. The mixture smells earthy, faintly sweet, and a little sour. Clay, straw, dung, and hay stirred together with bare feet until it binds like dough. It dries unevenly, creating walls that look almost organic, like the surface of a dried riverbed. In the richest households, people sometimes add hair from horses or even from their own combs to strengthen the plaster. Others, in colder lands, pour in blood from slaughtered animals, believing it hardens faster in the frost and wards off evil spirits of the cold. Whether the superstition worked or not, the practice left walls tinted with faint shades of red, as though the house itself carried a pulse, Windows are tiny, narrow slits meant to hold in the warmth, not to invite in light. The wealthiest might stretch thin sheets of animal horn across the openings, scraped and polished until they glow faintly translucent. Others use oiled linen, stiff and dark but enough to soften the bite of the wind. When the sun rises high, the coverings can be lifted to let the house breathe for a few hours, the light pouring in golden and smoky, carrying the smell of the outside world, frozen fields, wet wood, and the faint sweetness of hay. But when night returns, the cloths are nailed back over the gaps, and the house closes itself again like a living shell. Doors, too, are treated as barriers between two worlds. Heavy planks reinforced with iron bands keep out the wind, but drafts still sneak through. To fight them, villagers hang thick wool curtains behind the doors, or drape old cloaks across the threshold. Some homes even use animal hides, fur side inward, so the cold meets a wall of softness. Each small act adds another layer of warmth. These tricks, gathered over generations, create what historians now call microclimates, small zones of trapped heat around the hearth, door and bed, where life gathers and the cold hesitates to follow. In one corner, near the sleeping area, hangs a cluster of strange little objects, bundles of herbs tied with string, feathers from geese, scraps of cloth dyed red. They are charms, placed there to bind the warmth as old superstition claimed. The people of the Middle Ages lived so close to nature that they did not draw a line between the physical and the spiritual. To them, warmth and protection were as much matters of faith as of craftsmanship. A woman might whisper a small prayer while stuffing moss between the beams, invoking Saint Bridget, guardian of the hearth, asking her to keep the fire alive and the frost outside. The floor tells its own quiet story of adaptation. Beneath the straw, the earth is damp and dark, and in the coldest seasons, frost can creep upward through the soil, making the surface slick. To counter this, villagers spread a thick mat of rushes mixed with herbs and dried flowers, sometimes even layering old wool beneath for extra insulation. These rushes are replaced only when their smell becomes unbearable, which might be every few months or, in lean times, once a year. Yet the scent, when new, must have been beautiful. Lavender, rosemary, and mint rising through the smoke, a perfume of effort and resilience. The more fortunate might place flat stones near the hearth to warm the floor, and the wealthiest, the lords and clergy, sometimes installed raised wooden platforms where the cold could not reach. But for most people, warmth was earned by contact. The closeness of bodies, the steady breath of animals kept indoors, the shared space where every heartbeat added another degree to the air. Even the animals play their part in this symphony of survival. In many homes, livestock sleep under the same roof, cows, goats, or chickens penned off at one end of the room, their bodies radiating a faint, steady heat. The smell is heavy, the sound constant, but to the medieval mind, this was not filth. It was life. The warmth of the beasts seeps into the air, mingling with human breath, thickening the invisible blanket that keeps the frost at bay. In some regions, people even built small lofts above the animals, sleeping on planks just above the stable space, the warmth from below rising gently through the cracks. It is a kind of ancient central heating born from instinct rather than invention. By late afternoon, when the sun hangs low and the sky turns pale blue over the snow, the cottages glow faintly from within. You can see smoke trailing lazily from the rooftops, curling upward in delicate ribbons, a visible sign of life in a landscape otherwise motionless. Each home exhales warmth into the cold, and the cold accepts it like an old rival, knowing it will return once the fire burns low. The people move about their chores with quiet focus, mending cracks, refilling straw, tightening thatch, because they understand something we have forgotten. Warmth is not permanent. It must be built, guarded, and remade every single day. When night falls again, the village sinks once more into its fragile circle of light. Inside the cottages, the moss-stuffed walls, the sealed windows, the thick curtains, and the gathered bodies work together to create a cocoon of heat. It is imperfect, uneven, and smoky, but it is enough. The wind outside may roar, but inside there is only the soft rhythm of survival, the crackle of a fire, the slow murmur of voices, the faint sigh of walls that hold their breath against the cold. And you understand then, as the night deepens and the embers glow red, that the true warmth of the medieval world was not in its materials or its craftsmanship, but in its people, in the hands that built, the hearts that endured, and the quiet faith that each dawn would bring just enough light to begin again. As centuries passed, the meaning of warmth began to change, slowly and subtly, like the shifting of embers beneath a thick layer of ash. What had once been a simple matter of survival, the desperate struggle to keep frost from the bones, evolved into something symbolic, something that defined class, comfort, and even faith. In the earliest centuries of the Middle Ages, every fire was the same, a rough pit in the centre of a smoky room, a shared light that gathered humans and animals alike. But as wealth began to separate one roof from another, as stone replaced wood and villages grew into towns, the hearth itself transformed from a necessity into a mark of privilege. In the great halls of lords and abbots, the fire was no longer crouched low to the ground. It rose in grandeur, a wide, open blaze set in the centre of a vast chamber, feeding warmth to those seated farthest from the door. Here, smoke drifted upward through an opening in the roof, curling in long grey ribbons beneath carved beams and banners, while servants moved constantly to keep the flames alive with whole logs of oak, each one heavier than a peasant's daily bread. The sound of crackling wood echoed against stone walls, and the light danced across tapestries and armour, turning the hall into a living painting of gold and red. The fire was not just heat, it was spectacle. At the far end of the room, the lord or abbot would sit elevated on a dais, his figure glowing in the shifting light, surrounded by the warmth his labourers could only dream of. The hearth had become a throne. Around it, power and order were reinforced. Those nearest to the flames were honoured guests, those at the edges sat in shadow. Even the very design of these halls followed that logic. Vast spaces meant to impress, with tall ceilings that swallowed most of the heat, proving that warmth itself had become a kind of luxury. The peasants' cottages, by contrast, remained cramped and smoky, but their fires were alive with a different kind of intimacy, one that belonged to families rather than feasts. In monasteries, too, the fire took on a sacred dimension. The monks who copied manuscripts by candlelight worked in bitter cold, their fingers stiff and their breath visible on the vellum. Yet even there the idea of controlled warmth carried spiritual meaning. Fire symbolized the divine light, dangerous if untamed, holy when contained. In the scriptorium, a small brazier might burn just enough to keep the ink from freezing, and its glow was seen as a metaphor for faith itself, steady, pure, and eternal. Some abbeys built separate warming rooms where monks could thaw their hands after long hours of prayer. The air there was heavy with the smell of smoke and beeswax, and the silence was so deep that you could hear the faint pop of the logs splitting in the fire. For those who believed that the body was a vessel of sin, the granting of warmth was both mercy and temptation, a brief reminder of the comforts of the world they sought to transcend. In the growing towns of the later Middle Ages, hearths began to multiply. Blacksmiths forged new tools for chimney building, and masons carved elaborate mantles out of stone, adorned with coats of arms and carved saints. By the 14th century, the chimney had revolutionized domestic life. No longer did families choke on smoke or share a single fire pit. Instead, each room could have its own smaller fire, contained, efficient, private. The transformation was quiet but profound. For the first time, warmth became something that could belong to individuals, not just households. It was a shift in both architecture and psychology, a foreshadowing of modern comfort. But as fires moved into corners and walls, something else was lost. That communal intimacy, that shared hum of breath and flicker of flame that tied a family together in the darkness. The new chimneys drew the smoke away, but they also drew people apart. The hearth, once the heart of life, became a background presence, still essential, but quieter, tamer. In noble homes, fireplaces grew ornamental, decorated with fine tiles, carvings of lions or angels, and mantels where candles and relics were displayed. The warmth that once came from labour and closeness now came from servants, from wealth, from stone and design rather than from the stubborn pulse of survival. Yet in the small villages that still clung to the land, the old rhythm endured. Peasants still rose before dawn to coax fire from the ashes, still patched the walls with clay and moss, still slept close to one another in the single room that held their entire world. For them, the fire remained what it had always been, a fragile companion that demanded respect. It was fed slowly, tended constantly, prayed over when storms came too strong. Children were taught never to turn their backs to it, never to let it die. In its light they learned their first songs, their first stories, their first sense of safety. Even travellers moving through the frozen roads of Europe sought out that same glow. A candle in a window could mean sanctuary. A hearth's light spilling into the snow could mean welcome. For pilgrims, warmth was a sign of grace. And in churches, fire became both ritual and revelation. In candles burning before the altar, in incense smoke rising toward the vaulted heavens, in the Easter flame that symbolized the resurrection of hope after winter's long death. Over time, the technology of heating improved. Metal grates replaced stone pits, glass appeared in windows, chimneys became taller and more efficient, but the soul of warmth remained unchanged. It was still about connection, about the fragile boundary between cold and comfort, darkness and light. To sit beside a fire, even now, is to touch something ancient, something that carried our ancestors through every winter before us. And if you listen closely, as the flames whisper and the wood settles into embers, you might still hear it, that same quiet conversation between man and fire, between fear and endurance, between the world outside and the small glowing refuge built within. The hearth may have moved from mud to marble, from cottage to castle, but its voice has never changed. It is the same story told endlessly through time, the story of people who refused to freeze, who built warmth from nothing but their hands and faith, and who learned somehow to make the cold beautiful. And now, as the centuries fade into one another like the dying embers of a long fire, the snow-covered fields outside those medieval cottages melt into the neat squares of farmland, the timber frames darken, the thatch gives way to slate, the stone foundations rise higher, and still the echo of that ancient struggle endures somewhere deep within the walls of every home built since. We have changed the materials, we have harnessed the elements, we have filled our rooms with light and warmth at the press of a switch, and yet the memory of that older warmth, the one earned by breath, touch, and shared endurance, remains quietly alive in us, though most of us no longer notice it. Think for a moment of the difference between heat and warmth. Heat is mechanical, obedient, predictable. Warmth is human. It exists only in relation to life, in the closeness of others, in the flicker of the hearth, in the hush of a small room where the cold cannot enter. When we speak of a cozy home even today, we echo that medieval idea, though we have forgotten its cost. To them, coziness was not abundance. It was defiance, the proof that people could make gentleness out of hardship. Their homes were made of earth and smoke and hope. Ours are made of glass and wire and silence, but we still chase the same feeling when winter comes and the world turns white again. If you could stand once more in that old village, hear the wind between thatched roofs, smell the mingled scent of peat and pine, see the soft red glow through the cracks of a door, you would feel something familiar. The same comfort that makes us gather around a candle's flame or a campfire's crackle still lives there. The difference is only scale. The essence remains unchanged. Those people knew, without ever naming it, that warmth is the language of life itself. To build a home was to build a heartbeat, a space where the fragile flame of existence could keep burning against the vast and frozen dark. Tonight, when you turn off the lights and settle under your blanket, remember them, the men and women who scraped mud from the riverbank, who wove straw with their own hands, who pressed moss between beams to keep the wind out, who slept close together in smoke and laughter and fear, yet woke each morning to light another fire. Their ingenuity lives quietly in every wall, every room, every home that still holds the night at bay. The modern world, with all its ease, stands on their endurance, and as you listen now, the fire in your imagination still crackles. The snow still falls outside the small window. Somewhere a medieval family stirs, adding another log to the flame. Their faces glow softly in the light, and for a moment time itself seems to fold, you and they breathing the same air, sharing the same fragile miracle of warmth. Because to be human across all centuries has always meant the same thing: to build against the cold, to hold on to the light, and to make, out of the wild and endless winter, a home. The snow outside deepens as night returns once more to the sleeping village, that same village that has endured 1,000 winters without ever being remembered by name. The wind glides along the edges of the rooftops, sighing softly as it meets the warm exhale of smoke from the chimneys, and for a moment it feels as though the earth itself is breathing. The homes stand close, their walls patched with mud and moss, their doors shut tight against the storm. From above, the pattern of the settlement seems deliberate, almost organic, like a handful of pebbles pressed together for warmth. Each tiny cottage shelters its own heartbeat, its own circle of firelight trembling against the dark. Inside one such home, the family moves in near silence. The father sits by the hearth, sharpening a small blade that glints each time the flame leans toward it. His hands are rough and scarred, the hands of someone who has built his entire world from raw matter, from wood, earth, and endurance. The mother spins wool beside him, her spindle humming softly, her gaze fixed on the glowing coals. The child has fallen asleep, curled beneath a woolen cloak, his face half lit by the fire, his fingers resting on the dog's fur. The air hums faintly, filled with the murmuring sound of burning wood, of quiet breaths, of the house settling gently into its nightly rhythm. This is what the heart of the medieval world truly looked like. Not the grand halls of kings, not the cathedrals or the feasts, but this, a family gathered around a fragile fire, wrapped in shadows and devotion. The house creaks and sighs as if alive, its beams expanding in the warmth, its thatch shifting beneath the weight of snow. The walls hold more than heat, they hold memory. Every patch of clay remembers the hands that pressed it. Every beam remembers the sweat of the man who lifted it. Every stone remembers the prayer whispered as it was set into place. The house is both body and spirit, both shelter and story. Outside, the snow keeps falling, thick and soundless. The world is motionless except for the faint glow spilling from the cottage door. A fox passes through the lane, its paws leaving prints that will vanish by morning. The cold presses in from every side, curious, patient, eternal, but it does not enter. The house holds fast, the fire hums quietly, a golden pulse beating against the infinite night. And if you stand there long enough, watching that tiny plume of smoke rise through the storm, you begin to understand what these people knew instinctively, that warmth is not just comfort, it is resistance. It is the refusal to let the dark have the final word. Every flame lit in these cottages was a declaration that life, however small, however fragile, would not surrender to the cold. In this fragile world of frost and silence, warmth is faith made visible. It is the proof that hope can exist even when the fields are buried, the rivers frozen, the sky a dull grey that never ends. The people who lived here did not think of their work as noble, but it was every handful of mud, every bundle of straw, every spark coaxed from the coals was an act of love, the slow and constant work of keeping the world alive one winter longer. And so the night goes on, endless and kind. Inside the cottage, the last log settles into embers, glowing softly, the father's eyes close, the mother's hand still, the spindle resting in her lap. The child stirs once, whispers something in his sleep, and drifts again into dreams. Beyond the door, the snow keeps falling, the flakes catching in the faint light, spinning gently, endlessly through the cold. The fire breathes, the house breathes, and so does the world, because even here at the edge of time and warmth, there is something unbreakable, something ancient and patient and human, that knows how to make a home from nothing but earth, wood, and hope. The night stretches long and heavy, the kind of night that seems to have no boundary, no horizon, only the steady rhythm of snow falling against the thatched roofs and the soft murmur of the wind slipping through the bare trees beyond the fields. The village lies almost invisible beneath its white covering, the paths erased, the fences buried, the world reduced to quiet breath and pale light. Inside the cottages, life contracts to a few simple sounds. The pop of a log, the sigh of someone turning in their sleep, the faint rustle of straw as the dog shifts its weight near the fire. The heat has faded, yet the air inside the room holds a ghost of it, the lingering trace of flame woven through the smoke. The ashes glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat under the layer of grey. The father, waking briefly in the dark, stirs the coals with a stick until a small thread of light returns. He leans forward, listening, his breath quick and white in the chill. A moment later, the faint crackle of rekindled fire fills the silence, and he sits back, his shoulders relaxing, as if he has saved not only the fire but the family itself. To lose that flame, even for a single night, would mean hours of work to spark it again, and in that time the cold would creep back into the bones of the house, undoing everything they had built. Outside, the sky is low and colourless, the stars hidden behind a curtain of frost. The trees bend under the weight of snow, their branches whispering faintly as ice settles into their bark. Somewhere in the forest an owl calls, the sound distant and hollow like the voice of the winter itself. The villagers sleep through it all, bound together by exhaustion and the slow, patient rhythm of survival. They know the cold will always return, and yet they rise each morning to meet it again, as their parents did and their parents before them, stretching back through the centuries until memory fades and only instinct remains. By dawn the snow has deepened to the height of a man's knee. The roofs sag beneath its weight, the chimneys puffing out thin trails of smoke that twist upward and vanish into the pale air. The first sounds of morning are soft, a door creaking open, a rooster confused by the grey light, a woman's voice calling quietly to a cow in the pen. Life begins again, not with haste, but with ritual. The fire is fed, the ashes swept, the rushes replaced, and a new day takes its slow breath. The cold never leaves, it only loosens its grip for a few hours, enough for the people to move through their work. In one corner of the village, an old man sits outside his door, wrapped in a heavy cloak. His beard is white, his skin weathered and lined like the grain of wood. He watches the snow drift down from the eaves, landing on his knees, melting slowly. He does not shiver. To him, the cold is an old companion, not an enemy. He has lived through winters that swallowed entire harvests, through nights when the fires went out and the air froze solid inside his lungs. He knows that every flake that falls will soon melt, and every storm will pass, and so he sits there quietly, a part of the landscape, a memory of all the winters that came before. The children, when they wake, will find wonder in the same snow that weighs on their parents' hearts. They will run through the narrow lanes, their boots crunching in the white, their laughter echoing between the houses. They will scoop the snow into their hands, shape it into balls, and throw it toward the sky, watching it burst into powder before falling back into the drift. The cold cannot hurt them yet. To them, it is a kind of magic, a shimmering world where everything glows. Their mothers call them back inside, their voices softened by the air, and the door closes again on the sound of play. Within the cottages, life continues in the slow circle of work and warmth. Bread is baked on hot stones near the fire, the air filled with the scent of yeast and smoke. The animals are fed, the straw replaced, the milk warmed in clay pots. In every action there is rhythm, and in every rhythm there is patience. The people of this world do not chase comfort. They craft it, piece by piece, from the same materials that would destroy them if left untamed. The earth, the water, the wind, the fire, all must be balanced, respected, appeased. A single mistake, a forgotten ember, a broken wall, a hole in the roof, can unravel months of effort, and yet they endure. They always endure. By midday, a rare sun breaks through the clouds, its light pale and diffused, but strong enough to make the snow sparkle. The villagers emerge from their homes, squinting into the brightness, their faces red from the cold. They shovel paths through the drifts, laughing when the snow falls back faster than they can clear it. Some gather near the well to chip away at the ice, others carry logs from the woodpile, their breaths steaming in unison. For a moment, the village looks almost alive with colour, the brown of cloaks, the glint of sunlight on frost, the faint gold of thatch gleaming beneath the snow. And through it all, the fires never stop burning. Smoke rises in slow spirals from every roof, the scent of wood and heat drifting through the air like incense. From a distance, the village seems to breathe, exhaling warmth into the frozen sky. You can almost imagine the sound of it, the faint hum of life beneath the silence, the soft crackle of thousands of small flames keeping death at arm's length. If you close your eyes, you can feel the balance they created, the way each element of their world fits perfectly into the next. The cold demanding endurance, endurance giving birth to craft, craft shaping the home, and the home protecting life. It is a quiet circular logic, the same that governs the turning of the seasons, the fall of snow, the kindling of a fire. Everything in this world is fragile, and yet nothing breaks completely. Even when the roof collapses, the wall crumbles, the fire dies, it can all be rebuilt again, by the same hands, the same faith, the same stubborn will to live. And as the day fades once more into evening, the smoke begins to thicken again, curling in the wind like the breath of ancient giants sleeping beneath the hills. The people return to their homes, their cheeks flushed, their fingers numb, and as each door closes, the village becomes a constellation of light, small, flickering stars scattered across the white earth. Inside, the fires grow bright again, the rooms fill with laughter, and for a few brief hours winter loosens its hold. The medieval world was harsh, yes, but it was also filled with an intimacy we have almost forgotten, a closeness to the land, to the fire, to one another. Their homes, built from soil and faith, remind us that warmth is not something that can be given. It must be made every day from effort and love. Yes, of course. The long winter is not yet over, but something has begun to change. The air feels ever so slightly softer, the snow no longer falling in endless sheets, but in small, hesitant flurries that melt as they touch the roofs. Beneath the frozen fields, the ground begins to loosen its hold, releasing a faint earthy scent that mingles with the smoke drifting from the cottages. It is not yet spring, but the land has begun to remember that spring exists. Inside, life follows the same slow rhythm as always, but there is a difference in the way people move, an almost invisible easing of tension in their shoulders. The first quiet hope that the worst has passed. The fires still burn, but smaller now, fed with thrift rather than desperation. Every log saved is a victory. Every day survived a kind of quiet celebration. In the corner of the room beside the hearth, a few green shoots have been placed in a clay jar, early herbs grown near the edge of the woods where the snow has melted first. Their scent is sharp and clean, cutting through the stale air of winter like a promise whispered in secret. The villagers begin to step outside more often, their boots sinking into the wet crust of snow, their breath white against the blue sky. They listen to the slow dripping of meltwater from the thatch, the creaking of branches as the ice begins to fall away. Every drop feels like a miracle. The children are the first to notice it. They crouch beside the puddles forming in the ruts of the road, poking them with sticks, laughing at their own reflections. The adults smile faintly, though they do not join them. They know the thaw is only a truce, not a victory. The frost will come again before the true warmth returns. But even so, this moment feels like waking from a long, fevered dream. In the evenings, the mood inside the cottages shifts. The conversations which had been about weather and wood and survival now turn to planting, to tools, to the coming season's work. The fire still burns at the centre, but it seems gentler now, no longer a guardian against death, but a companion in planning. A man sharpens his ploughshare by the light of the flames. His wife mends a wool tunic, humming softly, her voice rising and falling like the crackle of the fire. The smell of cooking changes too, less of smoke and salt, more of bread and herbs, and the faint sweetness of stored apples thawing in their baskets. The roof, which has sagged under snow for months, now begins to drip steadily, each drop marking time. Water runs along the frozen paths, seeping into the soil. At night, it freezes again, but thinner each time, weaker, unable to hold its grip. The people mark these signs as carefully as we might mark the passing of days on a calendar. They know that every season is only ever borrowed, that warmth will always follow cold, that survival is a rhythm, not an achievement. On one of these late winter mornings, when the air carries the faintest hint of damp earth and wood smoke, a woman opens her door and stands for a long moment watching the light change. The sun hangs low and pale, but it feels closer, less remote. She steps outside barefoot for the first time since autumn, her feet sinking into the cold, wet straw near the threshold. The chill bites sharply, but she doesn't flinch. She looks across the village and sees smoke rising from every roof, the same as always, but she notices now that it looks different. Thinner, lighter, almost joyful. The thaw reveals everything that winter had hidden. The fences need mending, the roofs need patching, the paths are clogged with mud and half-buried wood, but these are good problems, signs of life. The villagers move through them with quiet energy, their tools clinking, their voices echoing faintly in the damp air. Even the animals seem to feel it. The dog barks at nothing, the chickens scratch at the softened ground, the cows low impatiently in their pens. The cold still lingers, but it no longer rules. And in the heart of every home, the hearth continues to burn. The walls, dark with soot, carry the memory of every winter before this one. The story of endurance written in layers of smoke and ash. Each fire lit is not just for warmth, but for remembrance of those who survived, of those who did not, of all the winters endured before. The villagers may not have words for legacy or heritage, but they live them every day in the act of rekindling flame, in the careful tending of the same fire that their ancestors once built from sticks and faith. Night returns, but it feels different now. The cold no longer presses like a weight, but lingers gently, almost tenderly on the edges of the dark. The moon glints on the thawing snow, and the sound of dripping water fills the silence where the wind once howled. Inside the cottages, people sleep more easily. The fire burns lower, its glow softer, as though it too is tired after a long season of vigilance. If you stand outside the village, on a low hill overlooking the fields, you can see it all. The faint lights glowing through horn windows, the thin trails of smoke rising into the calm night, the snow slowly shrinking under the moon's pale hand. The landscape is still but not lifeless. The earth waits, patient and eternal, ready to begin again. And in that waiting you understand something profound, that warmth and cold, life and death, comfort and struggle have always been bound together, shaping one another, turning endlessly like the seasons themselves. The people of this forgotten time did not merely survive winter, they became part of its rhythm, learning that to live was not to conquer the cold, but to make peace with it. Spring comes slowly to the medieval world, so slowly that the people scarcely notice it at first. The snow withdraws in shy patches along the hedgerows, and the frost that has claimed the fields for half the year loosens its grip by degrees, releasing the dark, wet earth beneath. The air is still sharp in the mornings, but it carries something new, a scent of thaw, of soil and sap, of life stirring quietly after its long sleep. The sun climbs higher each day, pale and uncertain, but its warmth feels heavier now. like a hand resting gently on the back of the land. The villagers begin to open their doors wide in the daylight, letting smoke drift out and cool air drift in. The fire still burns, but smaller, more symbolic now, a companion rather than a guardian. Ash is scooped out from the hearth and spread across the garden plots as fertilizer, its grey dust soft and fine beneath the fingers. The people who once huddled shoulder to shoulder in the dark now move slowly into the open, blinking like creatures emerging from a cave. The first tasks of spring await, repairing roofs, mending fences, clearing the debris of winter. Each hammer's strike and shovel's scrape is an act of renewal. The village fills with sound again. The splash of melting snow running through the ditches, the lowing of cattle released into muddy pastures, the chatter of sparrows returning to the thatched roofs where they nested before. In the corners of the fields, green shoots appear, tentative but certain, pushing through the frost-bitten ground. The sight of them brings a quiet joy, a wordless relief that needs no celebration. The people know what it means. It means the world has remembered them. The walls of the cottages, darkened by smoke and winter damp, begin to dry and crack in the sun. The villagers patch them with fresh daub, their hands moving with practiced grace, smearing the mud in thick, confident strokes. The smell of earth mixes with that of smoke and water, creating an aroma that belongs to this moment alone, the smell of life reclaiming its place from the cold. Children carry baskets of straw, men lift timbers into place, women scrub the soot from the hearthstones. The whole village becomes a kind of living organism, stretching its limbs after the long stillness of winter. Inside, the rooms change too. The rushes on the floor are swept away, the stale layers of winter replaced with new reeds cut from the riverbanks, fresh and green, their scent bright and clean. Windows are uncovered, the oiled cloths and horn panes polished to let in more light. The smoke that once hung heavy beneath the ceiling now rises freely, dispersing into the soft blue of the open sky. The house breathes again. By late afternoon, the warmth is strong enough to soften the ground, and the fields shimmer faintly with water. The men walk the boundaries of their land, boots sinking into the mud, their eyes scanning the furrows with the quiet reverence of those who understand that survival depends on this soil. They press handfuls of it between their fingers, testing its readiness, listening to its silence as though it might answer. The women scatter handfuls of ashes over the vegetable beds, marking the places where seeds will soon fall. At dusk the air cools again, and a thin mist gathers above the thawed fields. The smoke from the chimneys drifts lazily upward, merging with the fog, and the sky turns a deep violet behind the outlines of the cottages. The fires inside glow gently, less fierce than before, their light golden rather than red. The people sit together near them, not out of fear of cold, but out of habit, comfort, memory. They talk softly of the days ahead, of planting, of lambing, of trade in the nearby town. Their words drift through the air like sparks, rising and fading into the night. As darkness settles, the sound of the world changes again. Instead of the hollow hiss of winter wind, there is the steady drip of meltwater from the eaves, the chirp of the first crickets hidden in the grass, the gentle murmur of a world returning to motion. The villagers sleep with their windows unshuttered, now the cool night air rolling in, smelling of damp soil and smoke and far-off rain. The fire dims to embers, and for the first time in months the chill that enters the room feels like a friend, not an enemy. If you stand outside the village, at the edge of the field, and listen, you can hear it, the quiet rhythm of renewal, the earth turning back toward life, the same cycle that has played out countless times before. The cottages stand as they always have, their thatched roofs glistening with dew, their walls patched and uneven but proud. They are not monuments to the past, they are continuations of it, living symbols of a time when warmth was made, not given, when survival itself was the art of patience and care. And as the first true spring dawn breaks, the light spilling across the wet fields and catching on the smoke rising from the chimneys, you can feel the story closing in a gentle circle. The fire that once saved lives now lighting the beginning of another season. The same hearthstones still warm, the same people still tending them, generation after generation, bound to the rhythm of cold and thaw, of darkness and light, of home and world. The first weeks of true spring unfold like a slow awakening, a gentle stirring of colour after months of grey. The villagers, still cautious from the long cold, begin to step farther from their doors, their feet sinking into damp earth that smells of promise and decay. The snow has vanished entirely now, replaced by puddles that mirror the sky, by thin green blades of grass poking through the churned soil, and by the steady rhythm of work resuming across the land. The fields, bare for so long, are alive again with movement. Men stooping to break the hardened clods with wooden hoes, women walking in long lines, scattering seed with slow, practiced sweeps of the hand. The tools are simple: ploughs pulled by oxen, spades, baskets, and ropes. The rhythm of the day returns to its ancient pulse. The sound of iron biting soil, the clatter of hooves, the murmur of water running through ditches newly cleared of ice. Each act feels sacred, though no one says it aloud. These people do not speak of hope, they enact it. Hope is in their movement, in their sweat, in the careful way they press the seed into the earth, as if placing something precious in the hand of a sleeping god. At the edge of the fields, the hedgerows bloom with the first flowers of the year: pale primrose, white hawthorn, clusters of violets nodding in the cool wind. Bees begin to appear, dazed and slow, their hum blending with the distant sound of the blacksmith's hammer in the village square. Chickens scratch in the thawed mud near the cottages, their feathers bright against the brown earth. The animals that had been sheltered through the winter stretch and blink in the sunlight. The cows are led to pasture, their hooves sinking into the wet grass, their breath steaming softly in the morning air. The villagers watch them go with quiet satisfaction. It means milk again, butter again, life again. In the evenings, the cottages fill with a different kind of warmth. The hearth still burns, but now its smoke mingles with the smell of baking bread, of stewed greens, of herbs dried through the winter finally being used again. The women knead dough on wooden tables worn smooth by generations of hands, the flour catching the orange light of the fire as it drifts through the air like dust in a sunbeam. The men mend tools or sit near the doorway, carving small handles or sharpening knives, their bodies no longer drawn tight against the cold, but moving with slower, easier motions. The fire is no longer the only light in the room. The days have grown longer, and a soft, honey-coloured glow filters through the oiled linen window panes until late evening. The children are everywhere now. They run barefoot through the lanes, chasing each other between puddles, their laughter cutting through the still air like bird song. They collect handfuls of wildflowers, feed the chickens crumbs of stale bread, and lie on their backs to watch clouds drift lazily across the pale blue sky. For the first time in months, their mothers do not call them back in quickly. The world feels safe again, even if only for a while. One evening, when the sun sets late and golden, the villagers gather outside for the first communal meal of the year. It is not a feast. Such abundance is rare, but it feels like one. A long wooden table is set in the open square, the ground still soft beneath it, and everyone brings what they can: bread, cheese, dried meat, ale brewed from the last of the stored grain. They sit together, shoulders brushing, their faces open to the wind. The laughter is rough and full, the voices low but joyful. Children fall asleep on their parents' laps before the meal is done, and the fire built at the centre of the square crackles into the night, its sparks rising into a sky clear enough to see every star. When the flames die down and the villagers drift back to their homes, the air smells of smoke and damp earth, of renewal. The doors close one by one, and from a distance the village looks again like a constellation of small orange lights scattered across the dark. Inside each cottage the hearth glows faintly, smaller now but steady, no longer a matter of survival but of comfort, of continuity, of something sacred that endures no matter the season. The medieval year has begun again, just as it always does. A cycle of work and rest, of cold and warmth, of light and shadow, and the people move within it like clock hands guided by the earth's slow heart. For them there is no difference between the passing of time and the turning of soil, between faith and the act of lighting the fire, each morning. Both are forms of devotion. And as you stand at the edge of that reborn village, the evening mist gathering low around your feet, you can feel it, the steady rhythm of life that has carried through centuries, the heartbeat of fire and frost that still echoes in every home we build, every meal we share, every quiet night we survive. By the time summer settles over the medieval world, it arrives not with a sudden burst but as a slow unfolding, a warmth that seeps gently into the bones of the land, spreading through the fields and forests until the memory of winter feels like something that happened in another lifetime. The days stretch long and pale, the kind of days where light seems to pool on every surface, sliding across thatched roofs and shimmering in puddles left by night rain. The air hums with life, bees moving lazily from bloom to bloom, birds calling from the hedgerows, cattle lowing in the distance. The village itself has changed. The walls that once trapped heat now keep it out. The thick thatch that once held back snow now casts cool shadows across the rooms. The hearth still burns, but faintly, a small polite flame used only for cooking. Its smoke thinner now, its scent mingled with that of herbs drying in bundles from the beams. The cottage windows, once shuttered tight against the cold, are open wide, covered only by thin cloths that flutter in the breeze. Sunlight moves through them like liquid gold, painting the walls in shifting patterns. The same walls that glowed with firelight in winter now glow with day itself. The rhythm of life beats faster now. At dawn, before the mist has lifted from the fields, the villagers are already at work. The women move through the gardens, collecting early vegetables, their skirts brushing against wet grass. The men walk the fields, tending to the young crops, wheat swaying in the wind, barley rippling like water, the green shoots of beans curling up from the dark soil. Each step they take stirs the scent of earth, sweet and alive, the sound of scythes sharpening rings faintly across the open air, joined by the clop of hooves and the creak of wooden carts. Inside the cottages, mornings begin with the same familiar rituals, though lighter now, less desperate. The hearth is kindled not to fight the cold, but to prepare food, the smoke rising lazily toward the open louver in the roof. The smell of baking bread drifts through the village, blending with the scent of hay and flowers. In one home, a woman stirs a pot of milk to make cheese, her hands steady, her sleeves rolled high. In another, a man repairs a wooden rake, humming softly, his voice mingling with the hum of bees outside the door. The soundscape of summer is a song of work and life, of motion and calm in equal measure. Children run barefoot through the lanes, their feet dusted with pollen and mud. They chase chickens, climb fences, splash in streams. Their laughter echoes between the cottages, rising like birdsong above the steady rhythm of labour. For them, this is the world at its most endless days that seem too long to ever end. Air that feels thick with light and promise. They nap in the shade of hayricks or sit near the pond catching frogs, their faces sticky with honey and dust. And when evening comes, they return home tired, sun-flushed and happy, to find the smell of stew waiting in the dim warmth of the cottage. As the season deepens, the village becomes a mosaic of colour and scent. Gardens overflow with cabbages, leeks and herbs, sage, mint and thyme, their green spilling onto the narrow paths between houses. Bunches of flowers hang from doorways to dry, their petals brittle but bright. In the fields, the wheat begins to change from green to gold, its whisper filling the air with the sound of time passing. The people move slower now, not from fatigue but from contentment. They know this season is fleeting and they savour it. In the evenings the fires burn outside instead of in. Small bonfires are lit near the edges of the fields where the villagers gather to talk, to mend tools, to share ale brewed in the spring. The glow of those fires flickers against the pale blue of the dusk and the smoke drifts upward to join the stars. Sometimes they sing, Old songs, the kind that belong to no one and everyone, their melodies simple and circular like the turning of the seasons. The sound carries far through the warm air, reaching the edge of the forest, the river, the night. Inside the cottages, the air feels softer, almost lazy. The thick blankets and furs have been packed away, replaced by linen sheets cool to the touch. The scent of lavender and dried herbs fills the sleeping corners, and the quiet hum of crickets outside lulls the families to rest. The houses themselves seem to relax, their timbers expanding in the heat, their thatch shimmering faintly under the moonlight. You can almost hear them breathing, as though the structures too are alive, as though after surviving the crushing weight of winter, they too deserve to rest. The medieval home, once a fortress against the cold, now becomes a sanctuary of shade and air. Its purpose shifts with the season, yet its heart, the hearth, the centre of all things, remains constant. Even when the fire is barely aglow, it anchors the space, a reminder that the same flame that defied the winter now flickers gently through the golden months of plenty. And when you step outside into the soft night, the world feels infinite. Fireflies blink over the fields, the stars shimmer low and bright, and the wind carries the scent of ripening grain. The same land that once seemed merciless is now kind, its edges softened by warmth and time. Somewhere in the darkness a dog barks once, then falls silent. The sound of the river murmurs beyond the trees. You realize then that this cycle of cold and heat, hunger and abundance, fear and peace, is the oldest story the world knows. The medieval villagers did not need to be told that life moves in circles. They lived within that truth every day. And as you stand there watching the glow of the cottages fade into the night, you understand that their small world, built from mud, timber, and patience, was never really gone. Its echo lives quietly in us still, in every home lit by a small, steady flame. By late summer, the air begins to change again. The light softens, becoming heavier, more golden, as though the sun itself is beginning to tire from its long reign. The fields that once shimmered green now burn with the deep amber of ripening grain, and the sound that fills the land is no longer the quiet hum of growing things, but the rhythmic swish of scythes moving through stalks of wheat. The harvest has come, and with it, a kind of beautiful urgency. The entire village moves to its pulse. From dawn to dusk, the people are in the fields. The men cut and bind, their backs bent under the weight of labour, the muscles of their arms shining with sweat in the slanted light. The women follow behind, gathering sheaves into stacks, their skirts brushing against the stubble, their laughter rising above the drone of insects. Even the children join in, carrying small bundles of grain, their faces flushed and determined. The air hums with work, but it is not the desperate labour of survival. It is something more sacred. The harvest as ritual, as thanksgiving, as proof that another year has been endured. When the sun climbs high, the workers rest in the shade of hayricks, their breaths slow and deep, the scent of cut wheat clinging to their clothes. They drink ale from wooden flasks, eat coarse bread and cheese, and watch the fields shimmer in the heat. Above them, larks sing in spirals of sound, and bees move lazily between the last wild flowers at the field's edge. For a few moments, the world feels perfectly balanced. Not too hot, not too cold, not too harsh, just alive. As the day wanes, the work continues. The last sheaves are gathered, the carts filled, the oxen driven slowly back toward the village. The sound of wheels creaking through the ruts echoes down the lanes as the golden light deepens, catching on the faces of those who walk beside them. By the time the sun dips below the trees, the whole landscape seems to glow from within, cottages, fields, and sky, all painted with the same warm hue of fulfillment. Inside the homes, preparations begin for the feast to come. Bread is baked in great round loaves, the ovens fired hot for the first time in months. The smell of grain and smoke fills the air, mingling with that of roasting meat and herbs hung to dry from the rafters. The women move quickly, their hands practiced, their motions precise. The men bring in barrels of ale and bundles of wood for the fires. Even the poorest house, the humblest hearth, takes on a kind of majesty in these days. When the first stars appear, the village gathers in the open once more. Torches line the square, their flames trembling in the night breeze. The harvest feast begins with prayers, quiet words offered to the same earth that both gives and takes, to the sun that has warmed them, to the rain that has spared them. Then the music starts, rough but joyful, pipes and drums echoing into the darkness. The people dance barefoot on the packed earth, their movements clumsy but free, their laughter carrying far into the night. For this brief time, the world feels generous again. The tables are covered with food, bread, cheese, apples, roasted fowl, and the first sweet honey of the year. Ale flows easily, and stories pass from one mouth to another like flame from torch to torch. Children fall asleep in their mother's arms, faces smudged with soot and crumbs, and the old sit quietly by the fire, watching, remembering other feasts, other harvests, other years when the same songs were sung. The cottages glow brighter than ever in these days. Their doors are open to the air, their windows lit from within. The thatch, dry and golden from the long summer, rustles softly when the wind moves through it. Inside, the walls are lined with the fruits of the season, herbs tied in bundles, onions strung on cords, jars of preserved fruit glowing like amber in the firelight. The smell is rich and alive, the scent of life stored for the coming cold. But even in this moment of abundance, the villagers know that change is coming. The wind carries a new note now, a whisper of coolness at dawn, a sharpness in the evenings that hints of frost. The swallows begin to gather on the roofs, restless, preparing for their long flight south. The fires outside grow larger again, and the laughter, though still full, holds a hint of reflection. Soon, they will begin the work of sealing the homes once more. Moss will be pressed between the beams, thatch repaired, doors thickened with new planks. The great cycle that began in snow will soon turn back toward it. The fields will sleep again, the earth will grow hard, and the warmth they have built will retreat once more behind walls and beneath firs. But for now the night is soft, the fields are full, and the people rest in the fleeting peace of plenty. If you stand among them, near the fading firelight, you can feel it. The weight of time turning, the invisible thread that ties every season to the next, every home to the earth beneath it. The same hands that built the hearths now gather the grain, the same smoke that rose in the dead of winter now rises over the feast. And when the music quiets, when the fires burn low, when only embers remain, the villagers look to the sky, to the same stars their ancestors once followed, and they know that soon the cycle will begin again. The days grow shorter now. The sunlight, once bright and endless, slips through the clouds in pale ribbons that linger for only an hour or two before fading into grey. The air smells of rain and fallen leaves, the scent both sweet and sorrowful, a reminder that everything that lived must rest. The fields lie empty again, their furrows dark and glistening with moisture. The golden stubble of wheat, once sharp and proud, softens under the drizzle, bending into the soil that gave it birth. In the hedgerows the last blackberries shrivel on the vine. The geese fly overhead in wavering lines, their cries echoing down the valley like a memory of summer fading away. The villagers move slower now, their bodies and voices subdued, their laughter softened into quiet conversation. The harvest has been stored, sacks of grain stacked neatly in barns, apples packed in straw, smoked meat hanging from the rafters, onions braided and hung in loops by the door. Every object has purpose. Every sound feels measured. The year's labour is done, and what remains is the long preparation for darkness. In the evenings, mist rises from the fields, drifting low along the paths, wrapping the cottages in a thin veil. The thatch gleams faintly with dew, and the smoke that seeps from the chimneys moves heavier now, slower, reluctant to rise into the cold air. The first frost comes quietly, painting the edges of the windows in white lace, crisping the grass underfoot. When morning comes, the villagers find the world hushed. the puddles rimmed with ice, the breath of animals hanging in the air like tiny ghosts. Inside the cottages, the fire is coaxed to life again, no longer for cooking or lightness, but for endurance. The hearth returns to its old role: protector, heart, companion. The rooms grow dim once more. The windows are sealed with cloth and straw, the doors tightened with planks to keep the draughts away. The walls breathe smoke and warmth again, their rough surfaces darkened by another season of living. The rhythm of life changes too. The men work indoors now, mending tools, carving handles, repairing carts. The women spin wool, their fingers steady, their voices low as they hum to the sound of the spindle's soft whirring. The children gather by the fire, playing with bits of wood, drawing in the ash, their laughter echoing softly in the dim light. The world outside turns grey, but inside, the glow of the hearth fills everything with colour, gold, red and shadow, moving in slow patterns across the walls. Every evening feels longer than the one before. The nights stretch endlessly, and the wind outside begins its restless roaming again, sweeping through the bare branches, rattling at the shutters, whispering along the roof. Yet there is comfort in its return. The villagers know this sound. It is the same wind that has howled through every winter since the first homes were built here. They listen to it like an old song, sometimes frightening, sometimes soothing, but always familiar. And when the last leaves fall, and the sky turns the colour of pewter, the first snow returns, hesitant, drifting, uncertain. The children run to the windows to watch it, pressing their hands to the glass, their breath fogging the panes. The flakes settle softly on the thatch, on the fence posts, on the wood piles stacked neatly beside each house. The village begins to change its colour again, fading from brown and gold into white and silence. The year exhales, and the world sleeps. The first full snow falls in silence. It comes not as a storm, but as a slow surrender, blanketing the fields and roofs until every shape, every sound, every trace of colour is softened. The world grows pale and weightless again. The trees stand motionless, their branches heavy with white, and the river disappears beneath a skin of ice that gleams faintly in the dim light. The village becomes an island of smoke and warmth in a sea of frozen quiet. The people no longer hurry. They move deliberately, conserving strength, conserving light. Life has retreated indoors, back to the fire, back to the rhythm that has carried them through so many winters before. Inside the cottages, the hearth burns bright and constant. Its glow washes the walls in gold and amber, flickering over beams blackened by centuries of flame. The air smells of wood and wool, of bread baking slowly on flat stones near the coals, of the faint metallic tang of iron tools warming after a day of cold. The same fire that cooked their meals through summer now hums like a quiet guardian. Its light dances on faces bent in calm work, the mother spinning, the father repairing a leather strap, the child feeding the dog bits of crust beneath the bench. Beyond the walls the storm builds, the wind moaning through the eaves. But within this circle of light the world holds steady, as if time itself pauses to rest beside the fire. The nights stretch impossibly long, but they are filled with story. When the work is done and the stew is finished, when the flames have sunk into steady embers, the father begins to speak. Old tales of saints and spirits, of kings and forests, and the strange places where warmth and faith still meet. The child listens wide-eyed, half in the world of the story, half in dreams, and the fire seems to answer, crackling softly at the mention of miracles, sighing when sorrow passes. Outside, snow drifts against the door, sealing them in, but it feels less like a prison than a cocoon. The wind howls, the beams creak, the house breathes, and together they wait for morning. When dawn finally comes, it is a faint grey glow, more suggestion than light. Frost has painted the window again, tracing patterns that look like branches, feathers, maybe even wings. The world outside is cold and still, yet the air within the cottage feels alive. A log is added to the fire, the flame leaps again, and a new day begins exactly as it always has, with breath, with patience, with quiet gratitude. The people do not count the days until spring, they simply live them, each one a small act of endurance, each spark a reminder that warmth exists because someone tended it. And so the circle closes. The snow will melt, the fields will green, the fires will shrink to embers again, but the memory of this light, the fragile, faithful glow that holds the dark at bay, will remain. The medieval home was never just shelter. It was a heartbeat built from soil and hands and faith, a promise whispered to the cold that humanity would not yield. Even now, in a world of steady heat and silent walls, that promise endures in every candle lit, every window that glows at dusk, every breath drawn beside a quiet flame. Outside, the snow keeps falling, endless and gentle. Inside, the house hums softly, the fire sighs, and the family drifts into sleep. The wind moves around them like a great, distant sea, but here in this small circle of warmth, time slows, the world softens, and the story rests until the next winter comes, and the first spark is struck again.